This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
It's been almost 3 years since 4 University of Idaho students were murdered inside their Moscow home. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And just months since Bryan Kohberger stood before Judge Stephen Hippler, pled guilty, and received 4 consecutive life sentences, plus 10 years for burglary. For most people, that was supposed to be the end. The gavel fell, the cameras picked up, and the system moved on. But in this case, the end never seemed to arrive. Because this week, that same courtroom filled up again. Not for new evidence, not for an appeal, no. Not for some revelation about how this man carried out one of the most chilling crimes in modern history. No, the hearing was about money. Specifically, about whether the man who committed these horrible, heinous crimes should pay a few $1,000s more to the families he destroyed. It sounds trivial until you hear the details, and that's what we're going to go through. And I encourage you to press subscribe, and in the comment section, let me know your thoughts. The hearing was called to settle a dispute over restitution, the financial obligation Kohberger owes to the victims' families. When he was sentenced, his plea deal included $28,956.88 in restitution. It covered funeral expenses and repayment to Idaho's Crime Victim Compensation Fund. Everyone thought that number was final, but prosecutors returned to court asking for more. Initially, $27,000 in additional costs for travel, lodging, and funeral-related expenses that hadn't been included in the first calculation. And after a short but tense exchange, prosecutors admitted part of that request overstepped Idaho law. Travel and lodging, they conceded, can't be covered under restitution. So they cut the request down to roughly $3,100, the cost of urns for 2 of the victims. $3,000, basically. That's it. A sum so small compared to the loss that it borders on insulting. But for the families sitting in that courtroom, it's not about the amount, it's about the principle. The defense argued that Kohberger can't pay anyway. He's indigent, serving life in prison with no means to earn or hold property. In other words, he has no ability to pay. But he does. Prosecutors countered with something that turned the air cold. Kohberger has been receiving money. Not from a job or inheritance, but from people, strangers, idiots, people who should probably be investigated themselves, who sent over $10,000 into his inmate account since his arrest. $10,000 from supporters, from admirers, from the kinds of people who send love letters to serial killers and convince themselves that evil is a misunderstood genius. So he's getting money. And no, that money should not land Kohberger an extra Snickers. Prosecutors told the court that the money should go to the families, not into Kohberger's commissary account, not towards snacks and creature comforts, while his victims' parents are still paying off burial costs. The defense objected, of course they did. They said those funds were personal gifts. Ooh, a gift for murder? They're not income and can't be legally touched. The law, they claim, doesn't allow the court to see donated money for restitution. And that's where the entire thing just feels absurd. A system that can take your freedom for life but can't touch your ramen fund. Judge Hippler didn't rule that day. He listened, because he's a good judge. He asked questions, and then like any judge bound by procedure, he took the issue under advisement. A written ruling is yet to come, at least as of this recording. But the moment you strip away the legal jargon, this hearing wasn't about $3,100. It was about what happens when bureaucracy keeps grinding long after justice was supposed to be done. And for the Gonzalez, Kernodle, Chapin, and Mogan families, the sight of lawyers dissecting receipt dates and earn prices was another emotional gut punch. Kaylee's mother, Christy Gonzalez, put it bluntly, everybody knows he's never going to pay a single dime, so why do they care if that number is astronomical? And she's right. It's not about collecting the money. It's about not letting the man who took their children leave the record unbalanced. A zero would be nothing owed, and if what he did can be fully repaid with time served. Under Idaho law, restitution is meant to cover direct economic loss. Funeral costs qualify. Counseling and medical bills qualify, but travel and lodging does not. They also don't have a son of Sam law there, which this is, I think, the big reason why Kohberger does not want anyone touching his money is because he could actually make money off of the crimes. He could write a book. He could give his rights to an authorized movie. There's so many things he could do to make money beyond the nutcases that send him money. So, yeah, there's likely going to be money flowing from Kohberger. Where it flows right now is what is trying to be determined before the spigot is turned on. That's why the state narrowed the claim. Even so, the defense argued the receipts for those earns were submitted late. Oh, I'm sorry. Beyond the 60-day filing deadline and should be thrown out. You were too late with the earn receipts for the children that are in them that this man murdered. Too late. Look, I know Ann Taylor's doing her job, but at some point, when do you say, this is a little too on the evil side? That's where you start to feel the disconnect between law and morality. The families of murdered children being told the receipts might be too late. I mean, imagine hearing that after everything you've endured. It's the kind of moment that reminds you justice isn't built for compassion. It's built for procedure. But there's another layer here, because beyond the technical arguments lies something a lot uglier. The fact that this man has supporters sending him money. It's the sickness that runs through parts of our culture where killers become cult figures and victims become footnotes. We saw it with Ted Bundy, with Chris Watts, with Richard Ramirez, and now with Kohberger. A steady stream of people who convince themselves that if they just understood him better, if they saw the real Bryan, they could redeem him somehow. They call it empathy. It's not. It's obsession dressed up as compassion. It's dangerous. That's what makes this hearing matter more than its dollar value, because what the court decides will set a tone whether killers like Kohberger get to enjoy the comfort of fan-funded privileges, or whether that money gets rerouted towards the people whose lives they destroyed. Judge Hippler faces a difficult choice: follow the letter of the law or honor the spirit of justice. Legally, restitution must be realistic and properly filed, but morally, accountability should never expire. If he rules that Kohberger's commissary funds can be seized, it won't fix anything, but it'll send a message that even behind bars, the debt remains. If he rules the other way, it tells every future defendant that life in prison comes with free room, board, and a growing bank account funded by curiosity and moral confusion. That's why this story, as mundane as it seems on paper, still matters. It exposes the cracks in the justice system that appear after sentencing, when the cameras leave and the law starts operating on autopilot. The families are left to fight for scraps of meaning, showing up in courtrooms to argue over paperwork while the man who killed their children still gets mail and money. And maybe that's the most heartbreaking part. The endurance of the people left behind. They shouldn't have to be there. They shouldn't have to listen to arguments about the timeliness of their grief. But they show up anyway, because showing up is the only form of control they have left. When Judge Hippler's decision comes down, it'll likely be a few pages long, dense with citations and procedural language. It won't make headlines the way Kohberger's arrest or plea did, but it will carry significance. If the ruling favors the state, every dollar Kohberger receives in the future from admirers, from anyone romanticizing a murder, will go towards restitution, or a percentage of it will. If it doesn't, the message will be clear. The system is content to let killers collect donations while their victims' families fight over funeral bills. It's a small piece of the case, but it says everything about where we are. Justice at this stage isn't about verdicts or prison time. It's about the line items that follow. The legal echo that refuses to die. A murderer's account balance shouldn't matter, yet somehow it does, because it's the last thread of accountability left to pull. For the families, this hearing isn't closure. It's another reminder that there's no such thing. There's no fixing any of this. There's only endurance, the kind that forces you to sit in a courtroom years later listening to lawyers debate whether your loss still fits within the rules. That's not justice, that's survival. And that's what they've been doing since November of 2022. Surviving a system that keeps asking them to relive what they can't escape. Whether it's $3,000 or $3 million, the point is the same. You don't get to take 4 lives and still benefit from the fascination of the public. You don't get to have comfort while your victim's parents have court dates. You don't get to cash checks from strangers while the people you destroyed are still paying off funerals. The court will write its decision. The number might change, but the truth won't. Justice didn't end the day Kohberger was sentenced. For the families, it just keeps showing up on the docket. What are your thoughts? Like, morally, most of us are like, pay up. You should never get a penny. You shouldn't get any commissary. You should get whatever slop they feed you and call it good. And I hope it's all meat. Because he's a vegetarian. Here, you want some more tripe? Good. It ain't seasoned, and it ain't cleaned either. Extra protein. Tripe, by the way, for those of you playing along at home, are intestines. You gotta clean them good. I feel horrible for those families. Continuing to be re-victimized over and over and over and over. It's just... ugh. We'll let you know what Judge Hippler decides. In the meantime, give us your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already there, search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. That is where we live. We do appreciate that. If you're listening to us on the podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you might be, hit subscribe there too. So you don't miss any of our coverage of this and the many cases that we follow for you right here at the Hidden Killers podcast. And True Crime Today. I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
There's something kind of darkly poetic about the idea that Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of one of the most methodical and chilling crimes in modern American memory, was reading Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. That's the accusation, anyway. Not a manifesto, not some obscure academic text on criminal psychology, but a self-help book. And look, there's nothing wrong with a self-help book. There's nothing wrong with this book. So don't take it as that. It's just the irony of the man we're talking about reading it and what he did. And again, this is not a book that's going to make you turn into a killer and feel the fear and do it anyway in terms of what he did. So let's take a step back from that too. It's a paperback that millions of people have picked up in moments of insecurity or self-doubt. Nothing wrong with it. Looking for strength, reassurance, maybe even redemption. And in his hands, it becomes something else kind of different entirely. When investigators took Kohberger into custody in December of 2022, they cataloged the entire contents of his small apartment in Pullman, Washington. Among the everyday items, knives, gloves, receipts, laptops, there was allegedly a book, unnamed in the initial Pennsylvania warrant returns, but described in one chillingly simple note, book, with underlining on page 118. Months later, reporting by the Idaho Statesman identified that book as Susan Jeffers' Feel the Pain and Do It Anyway. And one line, underlining on page 118, feels almost like a riddle left behind by the universe. What did he underline? Why that page? What was he trying to absorb? We don't know the exact sentence he marked, but we know the book's message. That fear is inevitable. And courage is not the adolescence of fear, but the act of moving forward despite it. For most readers, Jeffers' message is empowering. For Kohberger, it might have been something far darker. A manual for overriding empathy. Empathy he didn't already have. A framework for domination described as self-improvement. It's like pouring the wrong type of gasoline into the wrong type of engine. What could possibly go wrong here? Let's talk about the book for a moment. Feel the fear and do it anyway. It's not a sinister work. It's an optimistic one. It's about reclaiming agency, silencing the anxious mind, and realizing that most fear is simply anticipation. The mind's trick that stops us from living fully or sometimes making bad choices. Jeffers tells her readers the only way to get rid of fear, the fear of doing something, is to go out and do it. In the hands of someone wounded, it's liberating. It's in the hands of someone disturbed, it becomes permission. Because to a person like Kohberger, whose world seems to have been built around power, control, and alienation, doing it anyway might not mean confronting public speaking or rejection. It might mean crossing the line between thought and action, theory and violence. And before we continue more into this, I want to get your thoughts on YouTube in the comment section. If you're not there already, search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. That's where you will find us. And you can comment there if you're listening to us on the podcast platforms. Thank you. Please do hit subscribe there, but also do check out our YouTube page so you can interact with us there and watch us do these as well. But that's where you can really get into this and we can have a conversation. So from everything we've learned about him, Bryan Kohberger was obsessed with control. Physical, psychological, intellectual. Classmates described him as socially awkward but arrogant. His professors noted his fascination with the mechanics of crime, the emotions of killers, a moment where thought turns into action. He studied criminology not as a means of prevention, but almost like he was reverse engineering the criminal psyche, figuring out what it takes to override normal human restraint. He wanted to feel something, anything, but fear? Fear was his weakness. That's what makes the discovery of this particular book so haunting. It fits right into his twisted psychology because feel the fear and do it anyway is about transcending fear through willpower, through mental reprogramming. And that idea, when filtered through the mind like Kohberger's, it could easily become the ideology of control. The premise of Jeffers' book is that fear never goes away. You just change your relationship with it. She writes that all fear ultimately comes down to one idea. I can't handle it. The goal, she says, is to internalize the opposite. I can handle anything. Now think about that through the lens of a man who spent his graduate career trying to understand killers. Not to condemn them, but to comprehend them. Someone who, according to multiple reports, was deeply uncomfortable in his own skin, rejected socially, and haunted by feelings of inadequacy. I can handle anything? To most of us, that's a mantra for courage. To him, it could have been a declaration of superiority, an erasure of vulnerability. Because for people with narcissistic or psychopathic traits, handling fear isn't about healing. It's about power. It's about suppressing emotion, overriding conscience, and proving that they're the exception to human limitation. There's something chilling about imagining Kohberger sitting alone at night, reading the book under lamplight, tracing those words with a pen, underlining them with surgical precision, as though rehearsing a mindset. You can almost picture the criminology student studying himself. And this is where feel the fear and do it anyway becomes more than self-help text to someone like Kohberger. It becomes kind of a mirror, because self-help at its core is about internal change. But in the mind of someone like Kohberger, change doesn't mean empathy or humility. It means control. Control over self, control over others, control over fear. And when a person like that reads, "You must take responsibility for your own life," they don't hear a call for accountability. They hear justification for autonomy. The idea that no one else matters. And that's what separates normal readers from pathological ones: interpretation. When you strip away empathy, self-help becomes self-worship. And that's what's so dangerous about individuals like Kohberger, who intellectualize emotion rather than feel it. He didn't experience fear the way most people do. Fear to him was something to study, something to overcome mechanically. In his 2011 essay, Crime Scene Scenario Final, he wrote about criminals as cutting themselves off from moral reasoning. He wasn't repulsed by that idea. He was fascinated by it. And that fascination turned clinical, curiosity into obsession. And when obsession meets ideology, even a soft, well-meaning one like feel the fear and do it anyway, you get something monstrous. And Jeffers tells readers that pushing through fear is less frightening than living with the underlying fear that comes from helplessness. She means it as a challenge to live fully. But for someone like Kohberger, who may have perceived his own helplessness as humiliation, it becomes a battle cry. Overcome helplessness by taking action. Prove control through behavior. Feel the fear and do it anyway. If he saw himself as powerless in social life, in relationships, in self-worth, this philosophy could easily have become a tool to reclaim a perverted sense of agency, not by confirming internal fear, but by externalizing it, by transferring it onto others. And that's a twisted thing about control-based personalities. When they can't master their own emotions, they master someone else's. That's what violence is at its core. It's a transfer of fear. You make someone else fear what you can't process yourself. So what does this tell us about Kohberger's psyche in the window leading up to the murders? It suggests that he wasn't just preparing physically or logistically. He was preparing psychologically, conditioning his mind to bypass hesitation, suppress anxiety, and commit to a plan. Reading "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway" could have been part of that internal training, a rehearsal for courage, twisted into justification for action. That underlined passage on page 118, whatever it was, might have been his personal mantra, his intellectual armor, his excuse. And that's the most disturbing part, because it reminds us that evil doesn't always announce itself with rage or ideology. Sometimes it dresses itself up in self-help language, in calm, rational, therapeutic phrasing, while quietly justifying the unthinkable. And let's zoom out here for a second as we continue to dissect this. And again, I want to hear your thoughts on the YouTube comments. There's a broader lesson here about how self-help culture intersects with pathology. Self-help books tell you to own your power, to take control, to manifest your destiny. For most of us, those are harmless platitudes. For someone predisposed to narcissism or psychopathy, those phrases are fuel. They reinforce the illusion that they're the architect of everything, even other people's suffering. They misread empowerment as entitlement. You see it across countless criminal profiles. From corporate fraudsters to cult leaders to killers, they all talk about power, mastery, destiny, self-belief, but it's never about growth. It's about domination. That's why in Kohberger's case, this book is more than evidence. It's a psychological breadcrumb. It tells us he wasn't spiraling uncontrollably. He was rehearsing. He was refining. He was training himself to feel nothing. Now, some people might argue, maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe he just owned the book. Maybe he picked it up at a thrift store. Maybe it means nothing. And maybe. But context matters. Because everything we know about him, the pattern of thought, the writings, the behavioral analysis, points to a man who didn't stumble into violence. He studied it. He dissected it. He prepared for it like an academic preparing for a thesis. So the odds that this specific book with this specific theme was in his possession by accident, unlikely. This was a man trying to reprogram himself to feel less, to think more, and to act decisively, no matter the moral cost. That's not self-help, that's self-erasure. It's another layer here, one that's almost tragic in a cosmic sort of way, because Jeffers' book, when stripped of its misuse, is really about trust. It's about surrendering control, not seizing it. It teaches that true courage isn't power, it's vulnerability. But people like Kohberger can't process that. Vulnerability feels like death to them. Fear feels like failure. So instead of accepting fear, they annihilate it. And when you can't coexist with fear, you can't coexist with empathy either. You can't feel for others when you've numbed yourself to your own humanity. In that sense, the book he underlined might be a perfect metaphor for his internal conflict. A man trying to intellectualize emotions he was incapable of truly experiencing. If anything, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway reveals just how detached he'd become from normal emotional reality. It's a mindset of someone who sees courage not as healing, but as conquest. For him, fear to him was not something to live with. It was something to dominate. And that's what makes his story so unsettling. He used psychological language as camouflage for pathology, and he turned philosophy into performance. Every gesture of self-control, every intellectual exercise, every paper he wrote about the criminal mind, it wasn't about understanding others. It was about constructing the perfect mask for himself. So what can we learn from that? That fear is not the enemy. Indifference is. That when self-help becomes self-worship, when introspection turns into obsession, when control replaces compassion, that's when humanity erodes. Kohberger wasn't trying to feel the fear and do it anyway. He was trying to eliminate fear entirely. And in the process, he eliminated empathy, morality, and connection, more than he already didn't have it. What's left after that is machinery, calculation, and the ability to do what he allegedly did in Moscow, Idaho, and is convicted of doing. It's almost eerie how much you can read in between the lines of a single underlined page. That one act, pen to paper, marking a passage meant to empower, might be the clearest window we have into his transformation from student into suspect. He wasn't inspired by evil. He was inspired by self-control. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Because when you take something designed to help, something that's designed to help you face fear, and twist it into a blueprint for erasing it, you don't become brave. You become hollow. And hollow people do unthinkable things when they mistake power for purpose. Tell me your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. I can't wait to see them. If you're not already there, search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Follow us, like us, subscribe, hit the bell, do a dance, do a jig, whatever. I don't know. But do please subscribe and let us know your thoughts. And hit subscribe wherever you're listening to us on the podcast platforms as well. We do greatly appreciate that. There's a lot more on the way. I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.